Few figures in American history have inspired as much admiration, debate, and reflection as Malcolm X. To supporters, he was a fearless advocate for Black empowerment and dignity. To critics, his uncompromising rhetoric challenged the comfort of a nation reluctant to confront its racial history. Yet beyond the headlines and controversy lies the remarkable story of a man who continually transformed himself in pursuit of truth. Malcolm X's life was not a static narrative. It was a journey of evolution. From a childhood shaped by racial terror to years spent in prison, from becoming one of the most influential ministers of the Nation of Islam, to later embracing a broader global human rights vision, Malcolm's path reflected the complex realities of race, identity, and justice in 20th century America. His voice electrified audiences, his intellect challenged assumptions, and his courage forced the nation to reckon with the consequences of inequality. Malcolm X did not simply demand civil rights, he demanded dignity, autonomy, and freedom. This is the story of Malcolm X, the boy born Malcolm Little, the prisoner who remade himself through education, the minister who galvanized a movement, and the global activist whose evolving philosophy continues to influence generations. Early life, tragedy, and turmoil. Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little on the 19th of May, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the fourth of 8 children in a family deeply committed to Black nationalism and self-reliance. His father, Earl Little, was a Baptist minister and an outspoken supporter of Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican-born activist who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey's movement promoted economic independence, pride in African heritage, and the idea that Black people should control their own communities and institutions. Because of Earl Little's activism, the family was frequently targeted by white supremacist groups. Their home in Omaha was burned by racists when Malcolm was still a small child. The family later moved to Lansing, Michigan, but the harassment continued. In 1931, tragedy struck. Earl Little was found dead near streetcar tracks. Authorities ruled his death an accident, but many believed he had been murdered by members of the white supremacist group known as the Black Legion. The loss devastated the family. Malcolm's mother, Louise Little, struggled to support her children in a society that offered few opportunities to Black women. Under the stress of poverty and discrimination, her mental health deteriorated, and she was eventually institutionalized. The Little children were separated and placed in foster homes. For young Malcolm, the experience was deeply traumatic. It planted within him a growing awareness of systemic racism and injustice, an awareness that would shape the rest of his life. A brilliant mind confronts racism. Malcolm was an intelligent and ambitious student. In school, he often performed at the top of his class. Yet even in the classroom, he encountered the barriers imposed by racism. When Malcolm once told a teacher he hoped to become a lawyer, the teacher discouraged him, suggesting that such a goal was unrealistic for a Black student. Moments like this left lasting scars. Disillusioned with the limited opportunities available in his hometown, Malcolm moved to Boston as a teenager to live with his half-sister. The city exposed him to a new world, one filled with music, nightlife, and urban culture. But it also drew him into a life of hustling and crime. Malcolm worked a variety of jobs, from shining shoes to serving food on trains. At night, he became immersed in the underground economy of gambling, drugs, and burglary. Eventually, his activities caught up with him. In 1946, at the age of 20, Malcolm Little was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison for burglary. What seemed like the end of his life would instead become the beginning of his transformation. Prison transformation. The birth of Malcolm X. Prison initially deepened Malcolm's anger and resentment, but over time, something remarkable began to happen. Encouraged by his siblings, Malcolm was introduced to the teachings of the Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad. The Nation of Islam taught that Black people should reclaim their dignity, reject white domination, and build independent communities. Malcolm found meaning and discipline in these ideas. More importantly, he began educating himself. He spent countless hours in the prison library, reading history, philosophy, religion, and literature. He famously copied the entire dictionary word by word in order to improve his vocabulary. Books became his pathway to intellectual liberation. During this period, he rejected the surname Little, which he believed represented the name imposed on his ancestors by slave owners. Instead, he adopted the name Malcolm X, with the X symbolizing the unknown African heritage stolen from his family. By the time he was released from prison in 1952, Malcolm had transformed into a deeply disciplined and intellectually formidable man. Rise within the Nation of Islam. After his release, Malcolm quickly rose through the ranks of the Nation of Islam. His charisma, intelligence, and powerful speaking ability made him one of the organization's most effective ministers. He established temples in cities such as Boston, Detroit, and Harlem, dramatically increasing the group's membership. Under Malcolm's influence, the Nation of Islam grew from a small religious movement into a nationally recognized force. His speeches were electrifying. He spoke about the psychological damage of racism, the importance of black pride, and the need for self-defense in the face of violence. He rejected the idea that African Americans should patiently wait for equality. Instead, he declared that black people had the right to defend themselves by any means necessary. This message sharply contrasted with the philosophy of nonviolent resistance promoted by leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. While King emphasized integration and peaceful protest, Malcolm emphasized self-determination, independence, and resistance. The contrast between the two leaders often dominated public discussions of the civil rights movement, break with the Nation of Islam. Despite Malcolm's success within the Nation of Islam, tensions began to grow between him and Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm's rising popularity sometimes overshadowed the organization's leadership. At the same time, Malcolm became increasingly troubled by reports of misconduct within the organization. In 1963, the assassination of John F. Kennedy created a national moment of mourning. When Malcolm commented that the tragedy represented chickens coming home to roost, his remarks sparked widespread outrage. Elijah Muhammad responded by suspending Malcolm from public speaking. The incident deepened existing divisions. In 1964, Malcolm X made the difficult decision to leave the Nation of Islam and pursue an independent path. Pilgrimage to Mecca, a new perspective. Later that year, Malcolm embarked on a life-changing journey. He traveled to Saudi Arabia to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, required of Muslims. The experience profoundly transformed his worldview. For the first time, Malcolm encountered Muslims from all races and nationalities praying together as equals. This challenged a belief he had long held that all white people were inherently oppressive. In letters written during the pilgrimage, Malcolm described feeling a new sense of hope. He began to believe that racial harmony was possible if people embraced genuine equality and justice. Upon returning to the United States, he adopted the name El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. He also founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which aimed to unite African Americans and connect their struggle to global movements against colonialism and oppression. The final year, a leader in transition. The final year of Malcolm X's life was one of intense activity and transformation. He traveled across Africa and the Middle East, meeting with political leaders and activists. He sought to internationalize the African American struggle by framing it as a human rights issue rather than merely a domestic civil rights problem. At home, his speeches reflected a broader, more inclusive vision. While he remained deeply committed to Black empowerment, he increasingly emphasized unity among oppressed people of all backgrounds. However, his break with the Nation of Islam also made him a target. Threats against his life intensified, and his home was firebombed in early 1965. Still, Malcolm refused to retreat. Assassination and legacy. On the 21st of February 1965, Malcolm X arrived at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem to deliver a speech. Moments after he began speaking, gunmen rushed the stage and opened fire. Malcolm X was killed at the age of 39. The assassination shocked the nation and devastated his supporters. Yet in death, Malcolm's influence only grew. His autobiography, written with Alex Haley, became one of the most influential books of the 20th century. It offered readers an intimate look at his transformation and his evolving philosophy, legacy, and impact. Today, Malcolm X is remembered as one of the most influential voices of the civil rights era. His ideas helped inspire the rise of the Black Power movement and influenced generations of activists, scholars, and artists. His message emphasized dignity, self-respect, and the right of oppressed people to control their own destiny. Perhaps most importantly, Malcolm's life demonstrated the power of transformation. He showed that people are not fixed in their beliefs, that growth, reflection, and change are possible even in the most challenging circumstances. Conclusion. Malcolm X's journey from Malcolm Little to El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz was one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history. He began life surrounded by violence and poverty, endured years in prison, and emerged as a global voice for justice and human dignity. His words continue to resonate because they challenge us to confront difficult truths about race, power, and inequality. Malcolm X did not simply demand change. He demanded a revolution of consciousness, and more than half a century after his death, his voice still echoes in every struggle for justice and liberation around the world.